You know that we have 4 gospel writers, and that these 4 tell the story of Jesus in different ways. And this year, we hear Mark's version of the Easter story, which, as you just heard me read, ends like this. But the angel said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Do you notice anything kind of un-Eastery about Mark's version of the Easter story? In Matthew's gospel and John's, women followers, disciples, see the resurrected Jesus. In Luke, the women meet not 1 but 2 angels. And in Matthew, Luke, and John, angels and or Jesus instruct the women to spread the word that he is risen, and they do. The one we hear today, though, this version is sparse. 1 angel, no resurrected Christ on the scene. Instead, an empty tomb. And while the 1 angel tells the women, Mary, and Salome, to spread the word, Jesus is going ahead of them to Galilee, they don't. We hear instead, they fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Or in another translation, trembling in bewilderment held them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The 3 women meet an angel, a messenger of God, who tells them first not to be afraid. Angels always say that, and people are always afraid. And then this angel announces that Jesus has been raised. And the women, terrified, say nothing. And that is the end of Mark's gospel. That's where Mark decides to end the story. Mark, who wrote this version before Matthew, before Luke, before John. I hope it's not blasphemous of me to say that this seems a little lackluster, a little abbreviated, a little unfinished, perhaps. And other people have felt that way, and over the years, people have written additional sections to this gospel, adding to the story, but the words you heard me read today are the only ones that are Mark's. So, here is the first question that I have. What do you think? Do the 3 women in this story believe that Jesus has been raised? They come to the tomb bearing spices, which suggests that they're planning to anoint the body of their dead rabbi. Not an angel, not their risen Lord. And then there's another question that I have. Once the angel gives them the big news, do the women really stay quiet? Can they? Or do they ultimately spread the word the way the women in the other gospels do? Somebody spread the word because we're here today. Do they believe? Do they or don't they stay quiet? You know, what they heard at the tomb is not new information for them. Jesus had tried to prepare these 3 and all of his disciples and followers for his death and resurrection, and he told them plainly 3 times in Mark's gospel alone. First, in chapter 8, to Peter and the rest of them, he says that he must suffer, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And that's when Peter denies the truth of this statement, lands himself in hot water with Jesus, and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Then, in chapter 9 of Mark, Jesus says to his followers that the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. and in 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. And the words that follow in chapter 9 are so human. We hear that the disciples did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. So instead, they launched this whole conversation about who's the greatest among them, missing the point. Talk about denial. And then on to chapter 10, where Jesus tries again to tell his followers. This time, we hear, on the road going up to Jerusalem, Jesus was leading the way, and those who followed were afraid. There's that word again. Jesus turns around to them and says, look, we are going up to Jerusalem. I will be handed over, killed, and after 3 days, rise again. You hear that? He's saying it over and over again. And with a plan like that, you can't blame them for being afraid. But they follow him anyway. So, Mary, and Salome have had at least 3 chances to hear how Jesus would die and rise again, but they couldn't understand. And on this morning after the Sabbath, they still don't understand. They, like all the followers, have struggled and continue to struggle to understand who Jesus is beyond their beloved rabbi and friend. Maybe they kind of understand, but then fear outweighs their ability to hold on to that belief. In this case, fear of the angel, sure, angels are scary. Fear of violence and persecution from the authorities, understandable. And maybe fear of believing and being wrong and having their hearts broken. That is a lot of fear. Again, how striking that the Gospel of Mark ends with the word afraid. I want to say it again. Mark ends his gospel, his story of the good news of Jesus Christ, with the word afraid. That word matters. That word is kind of a hinge between then and now. It links the 3 women at the tomb to us here in Los Angeles on this Sunday morning in 2024, because just like the 3 women, we have been told the most extraordinary news, hallelujah, he is risen, and we too feel afraid to believe. Here's what we do instead. We try to live our regular lives apart from God, try to solve all of our own problems, conduct all of our own situations, worrying constantly that we're getting it wrong, scrambling around in what feels like a maze sometimes. And as much as we might want to feel closer to God, we continually lose our way. And God knows that we're afraid, just as the 3 women are afraid. God understands that so often we can feel ruled by our anxieties and fears. So here are 2 things to remember that I hope bring you comfort. The angel we hear about this morning says, Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. Jesus will reach Galilee before these women, before the disciples do, and will be waiting for them there. So in the same way, in our own lives, no matter where we are, no matter what is happening to us, we can know that Jesus walks ahead of us, preparing the way. Even when we die, Jesus goes ahead of us, preparing the way. So we are never really lost. We walk along a path with and toward Christ. Second thing to remember that I think and hope will bring us comfort In addition to the many fears and anxieties we feel in our lives, and we are constantly stirred up by these fears. Some of you struggle to sleep at night because of the fears. Some of you struggle with anxiety every day. These fears are a big part of our lives. So, in addition to all those fears, maybe part of what we fear is who we actually are. Because deep down in each of us, underneath the fear, underneath the anxiety, underneath our trembling, our bewilderment, our ego, Christ lives in us already. Deep down, our true selves are made of God and belong to God. The tomb is empty because Christ lives in us, for us, through us, now and forever. In us, and creating a path for us, a path through our fear, a path forward, and a path, most importantly, inward to the knowledge of who we are, none other than God's own. Scholars say that Mark, by ending his gospel with an empty tomb, is actually calling all of us to action, to say, now the job is ours. Now it's your turn. You finish the story. You, powered by Christ within you, go and spread the word. Yes, the women are afraid. Yes, we are afraid. Continue the story anyway. We are made for this. He is risen. Alleluia. Amen.